What's going on, guys, and welcome back to Top 5 Scary Videos. While it may be some time before we start to see new horror movies back on the big screen, there's still plenty of novels to get your spook on this fall. That being said, I'm Taylor McWatters, and here are top 5 scariest books in literature. Number 5, The Turn of the Screw. The novella was so popular that there have been about 27 different versions made into film and television. The latest being a Netflix show titled The Haunting of Bly Manor, which acts as a follow-up to the 2018 hit miniseries The Haunting of Hill House, which I'll get into a little bit later on with this list. The Gothic novella was published in 1898 from author Henry James and features a governess who is hired to raise and take care of a man's niece and nephew. The 20-year-old governess arrives at Bly Manor and meets 10-year-old Miles and 8-year-old Flora. Great names, wow. The kids are the sweetest kids on the planet, of course. Now, what's a spooky story without the ghosts, right? The grounds are haunted by two ghosts who appear to have been past employees of the grounds. Love working, apparently. I wanted to read this book before the Netflix show premieres next month, and I'm glad that I did. The novella is written from the governess' point of view, so as she learns more about Bly Manor, the ghosts, and the children, her motive and tone change at the same time as the readers. So you're not quite sure if these ghosts are real, maybe it's just the kids playing along, or maybe the governess is losing her mind the whole time. I find it easier to read a novel if there's a main character that narrates the experience as well. That way, if anything scary goes down, you can just keep it completely separate in your mind and actually sleep at night, you know? The book itself is only 168 pages, so if you're looking for an easy weekend read, The Turn of the Screw might be the way to go. Number 4, Coraline. Okay, so does anybody else remember that creepy 2009 stop motion movie with the young girl who's got like buttons for eyes? The movie Coraline was somehow rated PG, and it was marketed as a fun stop motion family film that turned out to be the 3rd highest grossing stop motion film of all time. And if you have seen Coraline, you know this movie is not that kid friendly. I mean, this movie creeped me out when I saw it, and I was like 15. Imagine being 5 and watching this in a loud theater.
Now, you're going to stay here forever.
No, I'm not!
Yeah, I would my pants. The movie is based off the book Coraline, which was released back in 2002 from author Neil Gaiman. The book is much darker than its colorful movie adaptation. The story centers around a young girl named Coraline Jones as she moves into a new flat with her parents. Upon settling into her new home, Coraline discovers a door that opens to a long tunnel to the other flat. After being warned not to go from her neighbors, Coraline decides, let's see what this hype's all about. She finds an alternate version of her new home at the other side of the hallway, a seemingly happier version of her family too. Her other mother and other father have buttons for eyes and are much more lively than her real parents. And her other mother cooks delicious meals, and her toys can even come to life and interact with Coraline. The other parents pay more attention to her, so naturally Coraline wants to spend more time in the other home. The other mother asks Coraline to stay forever, but in doing so, Coraline must allow for her eyes to be sewn into buttons. So again, the fact that this book turned into a kids movie just baffles me. I remember sitting in the theater with my family, and about halfway through, everyone started looking at each other, a couple kids started crying. So if you're into dark alternate reality novels, and you have a thing for buttons, Coraline is the perfect pick for you. Number 3, Pet Sematary. Published in 1983, Pet Sematary was actually a book that Stephen King didn't want to publish, which is crazy considering it's one of his most recognized pieces of work. Horrified by what he'd written and the conclusions that he'd drawn, King was reluctant to show anybody the finished novel back in the early 80s. He told the Paris Review in 2006 that he usually gives his drafts to his wife, Tabby, so she can read them, but this time he decided not to. He simply put it in his desk and just left it there. And it wasn't until 1983 that the distressing novel was published as a final contract closing deal when he went separate ways with publisher Doubleday. He had it on the back burner, and his wife basically convinced him just to publish Pet Sematary and just be done with it already. And to this day, King himself finds the book very distressing. So what's the deal? What makes this book so terrifying that the author himself gets scared from it? Well, the story follows Dr. Lewis Creed and his family as they find a pet cemetery in their backyard after moving to a small town in Maine. After the family cat is killed, Lewis buries it in a pet cemetery, and the cat comes back to life. I mean, it is a Stephen King novel, so it's way scarier than I'm making it sound right now. The novel was actually inspired by Stephen King's real life. That's right, back in the 70s, King moved with his family to be a writer at the University of Maine. And while staying there, his youngest son was flying a kite on the property and ran towards the road with trucks flying by. It looked just like the road from the movie if you've seen it. His son didn't share the same fate as in the book or the movie, but King included this dark version of reality in his book because it was simply haunting him. He wanted to get this version into a book and out of his mind. So now we all have to deal with it. Thanks, Stephen. Number 2, It. Written by Stephen King, again, in 1986, this book is thick. Coming in at over 1,100 pages, Stephen King gave us arguably one of the greatest horror novels of all time. While fans are divided on which of the movies they liked more, the book has always been hit with fans, receiving the British Fantasy Award in 1987. The book starts with a young boy named Georgie Denbrough in a small quiet town in Maine named Derry. Georgie loses a paper boat that his brother Bill had made for him down the storm drain. We then meet our monster, Pennywise the Clown, as he offers him a nice shiny red balloon. Georgie politely declines the offer and in doing so meets his demise. Bill and his friends start to experience paranormal episodes, each one more frightening than the last. Pennywise targets children because they get way more afraid than adults, and that simply makes them taste better. Gross. After Pennywise is done his feeding, he returns to sleep for 27 years until it's time for lunch again. And after that, Pennywise returns to Derry, and the same kids who were once terrified by Pennywise have to face him all over again. It's just a train wreck. It's a great time. It would be kind of hard to find somebody who hasn't read it or seen any of the movies or wacky TV series about the novel. It's probably the most famous Stephen King novel next to Pet Sematary. I mean, it did scare me a lot more than the movies did because it caught me off guard. It caught me off guard. See what I did there? Not bad. No big deal. Once I finally got through the many pages of It, I was excited for It Chapter 2 to hit cinemas. While some scenes were done very well, the book, in my opinion, is still much better. As a whole, the time jumping is done in such a smooth way that you don't really find a proper time to set the book down and get some sleep. This book took me a while to read. I mean, and during that time, I remember having tons of nightmares, more than usual. I mean, obviously. So if you were a fan of the movies, just make sure you grab the book and give it a shot. Also, when you're grabbing the book, make sure you lift with your legs and not your back, because this thing's a literal brick and it's gonna pull something out of a spot. And number 1, The Haunting of Hill House. Written by Shirley Jackson in 1959, Stephen King has gone so far as to say The Haunting of Hill House is one of the finest horror novels of the 20th century. And I absolutely agree. The novel is the inspiration behind 2 movies, both called The Haunting, one a lot better than the other, and even a Netflix show titled The Haunting of Hill House. If you haven't seen the Netflix show, you gotta check it out. It's probably my favorite Netflix original series of all time. Oh, but what about Stranger Things? Nah, move over, Dustin. Your times came, it's went. Get out of here. I didn't read the book until after I was done with the show, which helped me out a lot. I mean, the book is terrifying because it leaves a lot up to the imagination of the reader. Some parts use stillness and anticipation as the main tool to propel the horror elements, which may be difficult to read. But after seeing the Netflix show, I had an idea of how this house is supposed to look, and more importantly, I had an idea of how the house was supposed to feel. So every time I turned the page, I was genuinely anxious and excited of what was going to happen next. It was like watching the show again for the first time. So if you haven't read the book, you should do so immediately, and if you haven't watched the show, definitely do so immediately. The novel is completely different than the show. I mean, it starts off with Dr. John Montague, who's very interested in studying the paranormal. And after finding the most haunted house of all times, he invites people over who have experienced some sort of paranormal phenomenon to spend a few weeks at Hill House as an experiment. Always a good time. Haunted houses and experiments. Let's do it. Always works. Unlike the show, the main characters are not relatives. We have Eleanor, who has experienced a poltergeist when she was 12 years old, Theodora, who has psychic abilities, and Luke Sanderson, who is related to the current owners of Hill House, who's just there to keep an eye on the guests to make sure, they don't steal anything valuable. And as soon as the guests are settled into their appropriate rooms, the horrors begin. Shirley Jackson makes it very clear that the house is vile from the start, with the terrors beginning only the second night of our guests' visit. On top of ghosts roaming the halls and mysterious voices being heard all around, the crew is left dealing with a love triangle within the house. So, if you're into The Bachelor and haunted houses, this might be your thing. Check out The Haunting of Hill House, both the novel and the show. Well, there you have it, guys. That was our top 5 scariest books in literature. Now, obviously, we missed a few hidden gems, so let us know down in the comments which ones. Also, make sure you subscribe and click that little notification bell. That way you don't miss any future videos. I'm Taylor McWatters. Thanks for watching. Good deal? Okay, here we go. Stephen King has gone so far to say the thing happened again with the typing. We're missing a whole chunk there. Sorry about that.
I guess this is good.
Yeah, oh, perfect, yeah. That was fast, wow.